The hammer slipped from my hand, clattering against the wooden steps with a hollow sound that seemed louder than it should have been. My wrists ached, my back burned, and the summer heat pressed down like punishment. I'd been at it since sunrise, scraping, sanding, repainting, the same steps my husband built 40 years ago. My son stood in the shade, arms folded, sunglasses glinting. "Why pay a builder," he said with that grin of his, "when mom's free labor?" He laughed like it was a joke, but his tone told the truth. I paused mid-swing, the brush dripping white paint onto the dirt. He thought he was being clever. He thought I'd laugh along, like I always did. But this time, something inside me stayed still. I looked at him, really looked. His shirt spotless, shoes clean, not a trace of sweat. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he checked it while I stood there covered in sawdust and memories. "Mom, don't give me that look," he said. "You know I'm just teasing." I smiled faintly, but it wasn't amusement. It was realization, the kind that stings before it heals. Because I finally understood, this wasn't help anymore. It was habit. His habit of asking, and my habit of saying yes. He pointed toward the porch railing I'd just finished repairing. "See? You've got the magic touch. We'll save thousands this way." He said it like we shared the work, like the sweat on my skin was his too. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I asked softly, "You and who, exactly?" He didn't answer right away, just smiled wider, like charm could disguise the truth. When I turned back to the boards, the paintbrush felt heavier. Each stroke was slower, more deliberate. I thought about how many times I'd done this, fixed, built, patched, mended, because someone else needed me to. The years had bent my back, but never my will, until now. He was still talking, words about resale value, and modernizing drifting past like flies in the heat. "Mom, this house needs to look new again," he said. "It'll help us later." Us. Another word that didn't mean what it used to. I stood there in silence, watching him walk back to his spotless car, the same car I'd helped him buy, and something inside me cracked open. Not in anger. In clarity. I realized I'd been building more than fences and steps. I'd been building everyone else's comfort, one favor at a time, while my own peace was rotting underneath. The gate clicked shut behind him, and the yard went quiet except for the sound of a neighbor's wind chime. I leaned against the railing I'd just rebuilt. It held firm, stronger than before, maybe stronger than me. The sunlight hit the porch just right, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a home. I saw proof. Proof of every hour I'd given away. Proof of how easy it was to mistake love for labor. He had called it free labor. He'd said it with that lazy grin, as if I owed him my time simply because I was his mother. I didn't argue then, but as I watched his car disappear down the street, my fingers tightened around the paintbrush until the handle creaked. People say there's a breaking point, a single moment when you stop being who they expect and start being who you need to be. That moment doesn't come with thunder or screaming. Sometimes, it's just a quiet breath in the heat, a whisper that says, "Enough." When I finally stepped inside, the kitchen felt different. Colder, maybe, or maybe I was just seeing it through clearer eyes. The sink, the counter, the old calendar pinned to the wall, all pieces of a life I had built for everyone but myself. My reflection in the window looked tired, but there was something new there too. Not bitterness. Not fear. Just decision. He thought I'd keep building. He thought I'd keep saying yes. But I'd already decided otherwise. That day, I finished every last board on that porch. I scrubbed the brushes clean, packed the tools neatly back into the shed, and sat down on the step I'd repaired with my own hands. The boards didn't creak under my weight. Solid. Silent. Ready. And as the evening sun dipped low, painting the sky the same color as my husband's old work shirt, I whispered to myself the words I never said aloud to my son. Enjoy your free labor while it lasts. Because this is the last thing I'll ever build for you. By the next morning, the soreness in my hands had turned into a steady pulse that climbed all the way up my arms. Still, I pulled on my gloves and stepped outside. The porch shimmered with a fresh coat of paint, neat and proud, but I couldn't enjoy it. His words from yesterday looped in my head, louder than the chirping cicadas. Why pay a builder when mom's free labor? This wasn't just about paint or repairs anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had been quietly rotting between the boards of this family for years. I'd lived in this house for 56 years. Walter and I bought it with nothing but savings, patience, and faith. Every dent in the wall had a memory behind it. Every scratch on the railing was a story. This wasn't just wood and nails, it was the map of my life. And yet, somehow, my son had started treating it like a project, or worse, an investment. When he'd first mentioned resale value, I brushed it off as another one of his business-minded phrases. But the more he talked, the more I began to understand what he really meant. He wasn't thinking about me. He was thinking about profit. And the thought of it, my own child seeing this home as currency, tightened something sharp in my chest. As I leaned against the porch post, the old boards groaned under my weight. Maybe that was how he saw me too. An old structure, worn down but still useful until something newer replaced it. The neighbors were having a barbecue next door. The smell of grilled meat drifted across the fence, laughter spilling into my yard. For a moment, I imagined Walter standing beside me again, laughing that low, easy laugh that always made everything feel lighter. He'd built this porch with his own hands. Every summer we'd sit here with lemonade, counting fireflies and talking about nothing. He'd said once, "A home isn't just where you live, it's where you're remembered." But I was starting to fear I wouldn't be remembered here at all. I'd become part of the background, useful, familiar, invisible. When Scott came by later that afternoon, he was dressed like always, casual perfection, a spotless shirt and the scent of some expensive cologne that didn't belong in a yard full of paint cans. "You've made good progress," he said cheerfully. "Britt and I were talking. If we replace the porch and repaint the siding, this place could look amazing on the market." He said it lightly, like a compliment, but every syllable hit like a nail. On the market. The words didn't belong here. I set the brush down carefully and turned to face him. "Market? What market?" He smiled, but his eyes flickered. "Oh, Mom, don't get worked up. I'm just saying, it's smart to think ahead. You never know what could happen." "I'm not selling my home," I said. He chuckled. "No one said you were. But planning never hurts." Planning. That was Scott's favorite word. Planning for college, for a career, for investments. He'd always been looking forward, but never once had he looked back. Never at the hands that made it possible for him to reach so far. When he left, he kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. I stood there long after his car disappeared, the echo of his words settling heavy in the evening air. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan turned slow above me, the shadows stretching across the room like old ghosts. I stared at the framed picture of Walter on the nightstand and whispered, "What would you have done?" But the house stayed quiet. I thought about how much I had given, money, time, love, and how easily it was all taken as expected. The truth hurt, but I couldn't unsee it anymore. If I didn't act soon, if I didn't protect what was mine, everything I'd built, all the memories, all the years, could slip away under someone else's name. That was the real price of his free labor. It wasn't the paint or the sweat. It was ownership. Of my home, of my choices, of my life. By dawn, I sat by the window watching the first light touch the fence I'd painted yesterday. My coffee went cold in my hands, but my mind was sharp, awake. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the mother doing what was asked. I felt like the woman who was about to start asking questions. Because something told me, this wasn't just about repairs anymore. Something was being built behind my back. And before the week was over, I was going to find out what it was. The next few days passed in a blur of dust, paint, and aching joints. Every morning I woke before sunrise, determined to prove I could finish what I started. Not for him, never again for him, but for me. The fence gleamed white, the porch railings shone in the sunlight. It should have felt like victory, but every stroke of the brush only reminded me how easily he'd dismissed my effort, how lightly he'd used the word free. By Thursday, I noticed the first sign something was wrong. 2 large bags of cement and a stack of wooden planks appeared in my driveway. No note, no explanation. The delivery man had already driven off when I stepped outside. The boards were new, expensive, the kind Scott wouldn't buy for anyone but himself. I called him, but he didn't answer. I left the materials untouched for 2 days. Every time I passed them, I felt that same knot twist tighter in my stomach. Then came the text message. "Hey Mom, just saw the delivery came through. Awesome. Next step. Porch demolition. Britt says we'll do the new boards next week. Thanks again. You're a lifesaver, Red Heart." No question mark. No offer to help. Just assumption. The words porch demolition made my blood run cold. That porch wasn't a project. It was a memory. Walter and I built it together the year Scott was born. His baby handprints were still pressed into one of the old corner tiles. I stood there staring at that message, my phone shaking slightly in my hand, and realized something that made my knees weak. He wasn't fixing my house. He was preparing to take it apart, piece by piece. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat in the kitchen with only the soft hum of the refrigerator for company, staring at the drawer where I kept my documents. The will, the property deed, Walter's old insurance papers. I'd barely touched them in years. But something inside me whispered, check. I pulled the drawer open and found what I was looking for, a folder labeled Home and Legal. Inside were yellowed receipts, tax forms, and tucked neatly between them, a crisp white envelope with Scott's handwriting. For emergencies, it said. I remembered the day he'd brought it. I'd been groggy from a dental appointment, half numb from anesthesia. He'd said, "It's just a power of attorney, Mom. Everyone does it. Just in case something happens." I'd signed it without reading the fine print. Now, under the kitchen light, my hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The heading read, Power of Attorney, Full Financial Authority. His name. My signature. And something inside me cracked in a way no hammer or crowbar could fix. I read it 3 times, each word heavier than the last. He had control. Over everything. My checking account. My property. My future. For a long time, I just sat there. The house creaked around me, familiar and foreign at the same time. I thought of every favor, every loan, every "we'll pay you back." And suddenly, all those small acts of love didn't feel like love at all. They felt like the slow tightening of a noose I'd tied myself. I thought back to the cement, the lumber, the projects, none of it for my comfort. He was dressing the house for sale. My house. The one Walter and I built from scratch. I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet, listening to the faint ticking of the wall clock. My heart matched its rhythm. Tick. Trust. Talk. Betrayal. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I made a promise to myself. If he thought I was too old to fight back, he was about to remember exactly who raised him. The next day, I went to the hall closet and pulled out the old metal box Walter used to call the vault. Inside were the deeds, the bank statements, and every letter we'd ever signed together. I laid them all out on the kitchen table and studied them one by one. That's when I found it. A second document, something new, dated only 3 months ago. A mortgage agreement. My name was on it, but I hadn't signed anything. At least, not knowingly. My hands went cold. My son had used my name. My home, our legacy, was no longer just mine. I sank into the chair, the papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. The sun was rising through the window, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like the moment before a storm. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the storm. I was the one bringing it. Scott showed up the next morning, unannounced, just as I knew he would. His SUV hummed to a stop in the driveway, its polished surface reflecting the house like a mirror that didn't tell the truth. He walked up the path with that easy confidence he'd worn since boyhood, the kind that used to make me proud but now made my stomach twist. He smiled when he saw me sitting on the porch steps, pretending not to notice the stack of papers on the small table beside me. "Wow, Mom," he said, looking around. "You've been busy. The place looks great. Brit's gonna love this." I didn't answer right away. I watched the breeze ripple through the curtains inside the window, the way the sunlight hit the porch boards I'd rebuilt myself. They gleamed, clean, straight, unyielding, like I wanted to be. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost too calm. "Scott," I said, "we need to talk." He laughed lightly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Oh boy, that sounds serious. Did I forget something?" "You forgot a lot of things," I said. "Starting with honesty." His smile faltered. "Mom, what's this about?" I picked up the first sheet from the stack and handed it to him. "You recognize this?" He frowned, scanning the paper. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get that?" "From where you left it. In my drawer. Along with every other paper you had me sign, for my own good." He exhaled, sharp and defensive. "Mom, you're misunderstanding. That's just a legal form. It's for emergencies." "Full financial authority?" I interrupted softly. "That's not an emergency form, Scott. That's control. You took my name, my trust, and you used them both to buy yourself leverage." He set the paper down too quickly, eyes darting away. "You're being dramatic. I didn't take anything. I was just helping," I said. "That's the word you always use. But help doesn't come with signatures I never meant to give." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "And then there's this." I slid the second document toward him, the mortgage agreement dated 3 months ago. "Care to explain why my home is now collateral for your debts?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. I leaned forward slightly. "You forged my name." His eyes flashed, defensive. "I didn't forge anything. You signed it." "I signed what you told me to," I said, voice steady. "While I was half-conscious, trusting my son. You knew I'd trust you." He stepped back, shaking his head. "You don't understand. We're under pressure. The kids' tuition, the loan. And you decided my home was the solution." He sighed heavily, exasperated. "You're making this sound like theft." "Because it is theft," I said, standing slowly. "Not of money. Of respect. Of the years I spent raising you to be better than this." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing against the porch railing. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "You're overreacting. This isn't as bad as you think." I took a step closer. "No, Scott. I've been underreacting for years." His eyes widened. Maybe he expected me to cry, to fold, to forgive. But there was no softness left to hide behind. "You've been looking at me like a resource, not a person," I said. "Like a ladder you could keep climbing. But ladders break when you step on them too many times." He flinched, and for a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who once asked me how nails held wood together, who used to hand me tools while his father and I worked side by side. But that boy was gone. You always play the martyr, he muttered. You act like you're the only one who's ever struggled. I looked him straight in the eyes. No, Scott. I just learned not to make other people pay for my struggles. That silenced him. The papers on the table fluttered slightly in the breeze, and I pressed my hand down on them, anchoring them like the truth they held. You need to leave, I said quietly. And don't bring any more plans for this house. It's not your project. It's my home. He hesitated by the doorway, his jaw tight. You're making a mistake. I already made one, I replied, trusting you without reading the fine print. He didn't respond. He just turned, walked back down the steps, and into his car. The tires crunched over the gravel, a sound that felt final. When the silence returned, it was heavier, deeper, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the air feels clearer even if the ground is still wet. I sat back down, staring at the porch I'd built with my own hands. My hands. Not his. Not anyone else's. Mine. And as the wind whispered through the trees, I made myself a promise. If he thought I'd stop there, if he thought I'd let him keep what he'd taken, he was about to learn that this house wasn't the only thing I'd built strong. Because tomorrow, I was going to rebuild something far more important. My freedom. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but focus. For the first time in years, my mind was sharp. No more fog of guilt or love covering what needed to be done. The papers lay spread across the table like a battlefield map, every signature a scar I didn't know I had. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was planned. Every favor, every don't worry about it, had led here. At sunrise, I brewed a pot of coffee, pulled out Walter's old briefcase from the hall closet, and started gathering everything that was mine. Deeds, receipts, statements. Ironed my blouse, not for him, but for the fight ahead. Because this time, I wasn't the mother doing chores. I was the woman reclaiming her name. By mid-morning, I was standing in front of a glass door etched with the words, Davis and Fra, Legal Associates. The same office where Walter and I had signed our will 40 years ago. Inside, the air smelled of paper and polished wood. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely. Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment? Not yet, I said, setting the briefcase on the counter, but you'll want to make one. A few minutes later, I sat across from Mr. Fra himself. Older now, white hair, steady eyes, the kind of man who understood when someone came in ready to fight. I laid the documents before him one by one, explaining everything. Not the emotions, not the betrayal, just the facts. The signatures I didn't recall giving. The mortgage I never agreed to. The trust that had been taken for granted. He listened without interrupting, his pen moving slowly across a yellow notepad. When I finished, the silence between us felt like the moment before a verdict. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Price, he said, voice even, you're not the first mother I've seen walk through that door with this kind of story. But you may be the calmest. I've had time to think, I replied. Now I want to act. He nodded once. Then here's what we'll do. He outlined every step. Revoke the power of attorney immediately, file a claim of undue influence, dispute the forged mortgage, and freeze the property so it couldn't be touched without my notarized permission. Each sentence landed like a brick being laid on new foundation. We'll build this from the ground up, he said. Properly this time. When he asked if I wanted to assign a new trustee, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. My neighbor, Marlene. She's the only one who's never asked me for anything. By the time I signed the last form, my hand ached, but the pain felt earned. I wasn't giving something away this time. I was taking it back. As I left the office, the midday sun hit my face, warm and clean. The street smelled like cut grass and coffee from the corner shop. I didn't rush to the bus stop. I walked, slowly, the way you walk when you've finally stopped running. That afternoon, I stood in my kitchen, looking around the house. It didn't look any different, but everything felt different. The air was lighter. The silence was steady. For the first time in years, this place belonged fully to me again. Not legally, not financially, but spiritually. Then the phone buzzed. Scott. I let it ring. He could wait. Instead, I went outside and picked up a paintbrush. The final touch, fresh blue trim along the porch railing. The same color Walter used to call victory blue. I smiled as the sunlight caught it. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was restoration. By evening, when the last stroke dried, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch with my feet resting on the step I'd rebuilt. The boards held firm, silent and strong beneath me. Scott had taken my trust, but I'd taken back everything that mattered more. And tomorrow, when he came looking for control, he'd find something he'd never seen before. His mother, standing tall, unafraid, and untouchable. Because the papers were filed. The trust was sealed. The house was mine again. Not just in name. In PowerPoint 3 days later, the silence broke. Not peace. Silence. There's a difference. Peace feels earned. Silence feels like waiting for thunder. I'd known it would come the moment the papers were filed and the trust was sealed. Scott had lost control, and people like him don't lose quietly. It started with a call from Brittany. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the way it always got when she wanted to sound calm. "Hi, Virginia," she said, dragging out the greeting like we were best friends. "We just wanted to check in. We heard from the bank that there's been some confusion with the mortgage." Confusion. That word made me laugh under my breath. "No confusion," I said evenly. "Everything's been corrected." There was a pause. I could almost hear her blinking on the other end. "Corrected." "Yes," I replied. "The house is no longer under your financial management. It's protected now." Her tone sharpened, the honey dissolving fast. "That's going to make things complicated, Virginia. We were in the middle of a refinance." "That's not my problem," I said. "You're being unfair," she snapped. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Unfair is signing my name without asking. For a second, all I heard was the sound of her breathing. Then she exhaled, short and sharp. "You'll be hearing from Scott." "I'm sure I will," I said, and hung up before she could say more. He showed up that evening. No warning, no apology. Just the low growl of his SUV pulling up in front of the house like an unwelcome shadow. When he stepped out, he looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Like the weight of his own decisions had finally found his shoulders. "Mom," he said, walking toward the porch. "We need to talk." I didn't stand. "We've done enough talking." "Look," he started, voice tight. "I don't know what you think you've accomplished by dragging lawyers into this, but you're making things worse." "For who?" I asked. "For everyone," he snapped. "For the family. Britt's upset. The kids are confused. Do you want to tear everything apart over a misunderstanding?" I looked at him, steady and silent. "A misunderstanding?" I echoed. "Scott, you used my signature. You mortgaged my house. You turned my life into leverage. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft with manners." He rubbed his temples, pacing the porch. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. The bills, the loans. And you think that justifies lying to your mother?" I interrupted. "You think being my son gives you the right to take what you want?" He stopped pacing and looked at me. Really looked. For the first time in months, maybe years, he didn't look confident. He looked scared. "Mom," he said quietly, "I never meant to hurt you." I held his gaze. "You didn't hurt me, Scott. You disappointed me. And that's worse." The silence between us stretched like old rope ready to snap. I could see the fight leave his shoulders, the way guilt starts to look like grief when it finally catches up. "I just wanted to make things easier," he whispered. "For who?" I asked again. He didn't answer. When he turned to leave, I said the last thing I needed to say. "You can fix your finances, Scott, but you can't fix trust once it's broken." He froze for a second, then kept walking. No goodbye this time. Just the sound of the car door closing and the engine fading down the street. As the quiet returned, I felt no relief, only a strange, deep calm. The kind that comes when a wound finally stops bleeding. The next morning, Marlene stopped by, carrying a paper bag of peaches and that look neighbors get when they know more than they're supposed to. She set the bag on my table and lowered her voice. "I saw your boy's wife at the bank, Virginia. Red as a tomato. Looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole." I smiled faintly. "They'll be fine. They just need to learn what no sounds like." Marlene laughed softly. "Well, if they don't, I'll teach them myself." We sat together for a while, sipping tea and watching the sunlight hit the fence I'd painted. The air smelled like summer and second chances. I didn't know what would happen next, if Scott would call again, if he'd ever apologize. But for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. Because this house was no longer a battlefield. It was mine again. And peace, I realized, doesn't come from silence, it comes from ownership. My home. My choices. My boundaries. And this time, they were built to last. A week passed before the world around me finally settled. The summer air felt softer now, and the house, my house, breathed differently. The tension that once lived in its walls was gone, replaced by a calm that came not from silence, but from ownership. Every board, every nail, every corner held a story I'd reclaimed. The mailbox filled with letters from banks, lawyers, and even Scott's attorney. I didn't panic this time. I opened each one with steady hands and a mind clear as glass. The trust was finalized. The title was mine alone. My name, only my name, rested on the deed once again. That night, I sat on the porch under the glow of the same yellow light Walter and I installed decades ago. The wind stirred gently, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small inside my own home. I felt rooted. A few days later, a letter arrived in careful handwriting. My granddaughter, Avery. Her words were simple, but they pierced deeper than any apology Scott could ever send. "Grandma, I don't know everything that happened, but I'm proud of you. Mom says you're being difficult, but I think you're brave. Can I come see you this weekend?" I read that letter twice before pressing it against my heart. Maybe this was how change began. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with someone finally seeing you the way you deserve to be seen. When Avery came, she ran straight into my arms, no hesitation, no fear. We sat on the porch, 2 generations separated by time but joined by understanding. "Mom says you're mad at Dad," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, I'm done being mad. I just stopped being used." She looked at me with wide eyes, too wise for her age. "I want to be like you," she said quietly. I placed my hand over hers. "Then promise me something," I said. "Promise me you'll never let anyone confuse your kindness for weakness. You can love people and still say no." She nodded, her small fingers tightening around mine. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the strength we find isn't just ours to keep. It becomes a lesson, a legacy, passed down like a shield. That night, when Avery left, I stood on the porch alone again. But it wasn't lonely. The boards beneath me were steady, the sky above stretched wide and forgiving. I whispered to the wind, "It's over." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The beginning of a life where I chose myself. Where peace wasn't something I earned through sacrifice, but something I owned through courage. And as the crickets sang their nightly song and the lights of the neighborhood flickered in the distance, I smiled and said softly to the empty air, "It's not too late to take it all back." If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Backhand index pointing right, share this video. Someone out there might need this reminder that it's never too late to stand up for themselves. Speech balloon comment below. What moment in your life taught you the power of saying no? Thumbs up like if you believe every person deserves respect, no matter their age. Bell subscribe for more real, powerful stories that remind us, love isn't free labor. It's choice, it's strength, it's self-worth.